Okay, thank you so much. And it's before valedictory, it is the last session, but I'll request every one of you to please keep your energies high. Why? Because though it is the last session, but it is one of the most powerful sessions we have here. One of the people who are actually bringing the change in educating lakhs or maybe crores of children at mass level at the last mile. They are changing their lives by giving education to them uh, at the level of government. So this session becomes very important, and I'll request my team members, if there are people outside, to get them inside so that there'll be more audience to get enlightened from this leadership discussion. So, as the topic suggests, that it is about National Education Policy 2020, the reforms, the vision, and innovation to transform India's school education. Just before the last panel discussion, we had seen a presentation by Director of Secondary Education, Government of Rajasthan, who has implemented artificial intelligence in school education ecosystem of the state, especially in the area of assessment. And they claim that it is arguably the first AI implementation in that segment. So if we get to know something like this, it becomes very inspiring, and it gives a very positive note when we talk about implementing technology to reach to the child at the last mile and giving that child an equal and the quality education which is being given in the private schools or say any other entity. And we are sure that governments are working on it. We have government leadership from Madhya Pradesh, Punjab. We had Gujarat, and he discussed in the previous session in the morning. And we have private stakeholder here also taking part in that discussion. So before we start the discussion, we'll be requesting for initial remarks from all our speakers. And I'll start with Ma'am Rashmi Arun Shami, who is Principal Secretary of Department of School Education, Government of Madhya Pradesh. Madam, in the last session, we were discussing that there were private school owners who were discussing that the budget on education which government spend can be more. And there are challenges that can be met. So in that scenario, how do you see school education in government schools and providing mass education to these people at the last mile? How challenging it is, and how you are leveraging technology to do the same?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's very interesting to learn from not just the government sector, but it's a rare opportunity to also listen to the views of the private sector and understand their concerns and learn from them. So thank you so much. So, okay, so I think when you're talking about the challenges and the kind of spending that we do in education, so I think for any state government, and certainly for Madhya Pradesh, possibly the largest chunk of money that is being spent on personnel anywhere is in the field of school education. However, if I look at the spending pattern of a private school, and if I look at the spending pattern of a government school, we find that in the private sector, the expenditure on salary will be possibly usually 40-50%, maybe 60%, and the rest of the money is spent on other things. But unfortunately in the government, major chunk of our expenditures is on salaries. There's not enough money being spent on other activities. So what we really need to do is improve our spending on other things, quality improvement, etc. Because then that will balance out what is happening. The challenge for the government sector is that we are looking at huge numbers. The RT mandates that we have to have a primary school for every habitation within 1 kilometer of every habitation, and a middle school at every 3 kilometers for every habitation. This basically means that we are running a very, very large number of schools, and becomes hard to monitor those schools because in Madhya Pradesh, for example, in my state, we have close to 80,000 primary schools. So it's impossible to really monitor that kind of thing. So what's really then, as you're talking about technology, if we are able to leverage technology to help monitor, and if we are able to help technology balance or bridge the gap for lack of teachers or lack of subject teachers, then I think that becomes very helpful, because our challenge is not so much lack of teachers, our challenge is that we don't have good teachers in critical subjects like science, like mathematics. So then that becomes a problem. So if we can use technology to leverage that, I think that would be a big help. Yeah.
I think you have presented right facts about how vast is government school education ecosystem, and the right challenges also you mentioned. We'll also come to the solution part in the further discussion, and how also how national education policy can help us in solving them. Ms. Jaspreet Talwar, ma'am, you are Principal Secretary in Department of School and Higher Education and Languages both. So I think it's a big responsibility to you about managing all the aspects of education in government of Punjab. And also in Punjab, we have seen that the new government is also of the party, which mostly talks about their education reform in Delhi. So I think you must have a great job to do in Punjab as well on the similar lines. But I would like to know from you that what kind of special focus Punjab is giving on their school and higher education. What's new there in the kitty?
Thank you. I think the points which Rashmi just raised are quite similar in all the states. The same issues come in, that we are dealing with a very large number of schools. We are dealing with a large number of human resource dealing with the schools also. And therefore, somewhere down the line, technology is required to monitor them. Punjab, in a sense, has been a front runner. Let me just, at the outset, put a rider. I've just been in the sector for about 4 to 5 months in both sectors, whether it's higher or school education. But the governments, consecutive governments, and even the present government have been focusing education for a long time. And I would say more school education rather than higher education. And in school education, there would be, I think, verticals I would talk about. So vertical is, one is the simple learning, that is the teaching which happens in the schools. Second is the skilling part, let's say, to do. So you learn to do something, learn for knowledge, learn to do something. And then there is the third aspect of life skills, like about how to be able to handle your life, about yourself personally, and about the society in which you live. Now, as far as the government of Punjab is concerned, they have been taking a lot of initiative. The learning part is there for all. In fact, during the COVID, you would have seen the NAS results. Punjab has done extremely well on that because they had leveraged technology for quite some time now. And we had EduSat, we had online learning, we had digital materials which could be shared, and we were able to scale up very quickly during the pandemic, and the children were able to have access. So we had given children smartphones in the senior classes and things like that. But yet there is a lot to be done, and I'll come to that also. So there was work happening on that front in terms of learning, digital learning, and it is happening now. On the skilling side, you would know that all schools under the Samagra Sikhya are doing what is called the vocational training, but a lot more needs to be done, and to dovetail it with the higher education. So when people pass out of school, what is the focus, where do they go in higher? Nobody knows. So I might do a wellness and beauty course in my 12th, then I'll end up doing a graduation in English or in Punjabi in my graduation. So my employability goes down because where am I going to go thereafter? So I think a lot of thinking through needs to happen in not only our state, but even in the country, as to where are we moving in the vocational education sector, and how are we skilling people for that. And the third is the element of, let us say, the overall development as a good citizen of the country, in terms of your values, in terms of what you give back to society, how are you prepared for the challenges ahead. And I think there we have introduced a curriculum of what is called, the morning program that we do. So the students are doing Welcome Life. So that's a program that we've been doing, and it's a very good program because children are learning in the morning on different aspects, and they are made to speak, they are made to prepare on that. So that's a good concept which has been introduced. So there are lots of initiatives happening. On inclusiveness, it is happening because you remember there was a time when Punjab was known for having an adverse sex ratio in the country. But a lot was done on that because even in our books, in our curriculum, we are making the changes. So chapters are now being put in such a way that when you read a chapter, if there's an Air Force pilot, it need not be a man in the story, it would be a woman. So there is a curriculum shift happening, changes in the books happening. So little initiatives are happening in all sectors in Punjab, and there has been an improvement in the performance. But I would still say there is a long way to go as far as the government schools are concerned, and I think for that, for me, if I can take a minute on this, for me it is the teacher training. And I think that's one neglected area in the government where we are not focusing, we are not giving the kind of human resource development which should happen in the school education sector. Somebody mentioned in this panel earlier on the payment, right? In government, the pays are all right. But it's not about the pay alone. It's the capacity building. We are moving to a new education policy. What is the capacity building that we are doing? How well are our diets doing? How well are the B.Ed courses, curriculum being, reframed to meet the requirement of the new education policy? How is the diploma in elementary education changing? And these are aspects of higher education rather than school education. So we are retraining the people who are already there, trained into a system. But we are not looking at the inception or the induction which happens. So I think that's an area where we need to work on.
Ms. Jaspreet, Talwar, actually you mentioned rightly about some of the worries of the state governments and how to ensure them. You have also come up with the solutions which department has come up with. Professor N.V. Varghese, Vice Chancellor, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. When we talk about planning and administration in regarding to education, both the principal secretaries have raised some valid points. Like Rashmi ji mentioned that yes, budget allocation can be improved, and government is always looking forward to better the budget allocation to education. And definitely we all know that most of the budget is going in salaries, but there can be more budget allocation to education infra of the state government schools. And also rightly mentioned by Ms. Talwar that employability after 12th, what are the employment option, what can be the education which make a student more employable. So vocational education is very important. According to you, what this national education policy comes up with to solve such challenges and issues of state government, especially the government education, and what are the reforms and innovation that this NEP 2020 carries, and your views on this?
Firstly, thank you very much. It was very much interested to listen to both, especially the first. I worked a lot in Madhya Pradesh. One of the most quoted studies on quality of primary education in India is based on the Madhya Pradesh study, ours. And that time, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh were together. So I worked in Baiga, Chek, Rewa, Rajnandagaon, those places. So that gives a lot of insight first time for me. Sir, coming to basically to the question, let me talk one line about the budget. 1968 policy suggested that we should spend 6% of the national budget, national income, not national budget, for education. 86 policy reiterated that. 96, the Lord's Committee further reiterated that. 2020 policy also reiterates it, but nothing has changed. This is only on paper and reiterations taking place. We have sometimes, depending upon the data, some people say that we are 3.6% of the GDP that we are spending. Some say that we are 4%, etc. I'm not getting into that. In any case, what is important is that we are far away, in the last 50 years, we are far away from what we are supposed to do. Secondly, I do not think that the increasing public expenditure will be a solution to all the problems that we find in education. As Madam very rightly pointed out, the salary levels are reasonably high, but the productivity levels are rather low. And I would like to say that in the context, since I was specifically requested to focus on education policy, I think from a national perspective, if I look at the issues, single issue that I can highlight from the policy is that inequalities. How do we reduce inequalities in educational progress at the school level? There are different levels of inequality that we talk about. So for example, there is inequalities that you find that the states which are advanced, the gross enrollment ratio, GER if I can use that term, GER is very high and inequalities are very low. So for example, you take Nagaland, you take Kerala, you take Tamil Nadu, you take Goa, you take Pondicherry, this is the case. But if you take other states which are educationally backward, you find that they are also not only low in levels of educational development, but also inequalities are wide. So how do we address this question of inequalities? We in the Indian planning try to address this issue through targeting. There are two types of targeting that you find. One is a social targeting, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, etc. That is one. The other is the regional targeting. When you talk about the tribal development plans, many other things, this is the way that you are trying to do that. I don't think that a technology is a solution to these places. I have visited tribal areas, stayed in tribal areas. I don't think that technology is a good solution for middle class and upper middle class families located in the urban areas, mostly coming from the English-speaking households. These are not the priority area from a planning point of view I am talking about. I am talking about government funding. I am talking about targeting of the government funding to these schools which are deprived or to open other schools. Secondly, let me also highlight that the major challenge that we face today in India is not bringing children to the school. What happens after you bring the children to the school? We have constructed schools, and as Madam pointed out, given reasonably good salary for the teachers, both at the school level and at the higher education level. But the major challenge is that schooling without learning. That is the major challenge that the country is facing today. And this is more so at the school level. Let me elaborate on these issues. We conducted one of the first study in India, that too based on Madhya Pradesh case study, and we published the book in 1993. That was the beginning of the discussions on learning levels and learning achievements in this country. And under DPP, for the first time, a target was put in terms of learning achievement. Otherwise, we used to have only targets for schools, buildings, teachers, students, benches, desks, and blackboards. We never had any other target. Learning target was put. And this is something which is abysmally low in most of the countries, in most of the states, And in the backward states, you find that the distance between, the difference today is not between those students who are inside the schools and those children who are outside the schools. The difference is between those children who are inside the schools, between the children, good schools and bad schools, or good schools and not that schools, or effective schools and less effective schools. That is the difference that we find. So for example, previously the slogan was education for all. Then the slogan went to schooling for all. Today the slogan is that learning for all. And that is what 2020 education policy, that's a dramatic change that we find. So for example, when we were talking about the 20th century, we were talking about how to create schooling facilities to bring to the children. But the 21st century is talking about learning. So basically, schooling and education used to be priorities in the past century, and learning has become the most important priority now. And new education policy clearly articulates learning for all, not in terms of the education and schooling for all. That is why I don't want to elaborate further. I hope I'll get an opportunity to further elaborate on this point at this time as an initial statement.
Right.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Varghese, Professor Varghese, I think you have rightly mentioned that from assessment of a brick and mortar school to education now to learning, we have moved far ahead, and that reflects in our NEP 2022, rightly said by you. But we have one industry stakeholder with us, and whatever happens, the first person to face the repercussions or the impacts of any policy are the industry stakeholders. Vinesh Menon, CEO of Human Development and Social Impact, Ampersand Group. I would like to ask from you that when this policy comes, the National Education Policy 2020, as an industry leader, how do you see it? And India is a big country, the states are big, as our secretaries also said that there's a huge population, huge area, big number of schools, thousands of lakhs of schools are there. Length and breadth is an issue. So I would like to know from you that what are the challenges attached to this NEP 2020, looking towards the demographic or geographic situation of our country.
Thank you, Kartik, and thanks Economic Times and thanks ETGovernment for having me here. I've been part of many panels, but I must, in all humility, say that being a part of this panel with such distinguished luminaries from the government is indeed a huge honor. The group that I represent is one of the rare groups that does schooling work in both the private and the public domain. We run about 40 private schools, and we also work with more than 10,000 government schools, to try and provide education delivery. In both the private schools are pure K-12, and in the government schools, we apply whatever we have learned in the private school space for the last 2 decades. We have started to work with the state governments to try and see how we can deliver value. Now, I've always mentioned this. The two defining changes of 2019-20 has been, of course, COVID and NEP 2020. Because their timing has been so well, while COVID is not good timing, but the fact is that they both came in together and actually got everybody to sit back, and because COVID disrupted school learning to a large extent, and here comes NEP 2020, which starts making, as Varghese said, learning for all, kind of a tagline. And I think, therefore, a lot of respect for NEP 2020. After 32 years, I think it has some real defining policies and points which can be executed. I was also going to record and say that the manner in which, I think July 2020 is when this got launched. And I think by August 2020, I still remember Srimati Anita Karwalji, the Secretary of School Education, went online and started talking about how this is going to get clinically disseminated to the states and to the ground. Very well packaged process. But the challenge lies in, like you said, the country and the diversity. And each of you, Rashmi ma'am, talked about data and numbers. Look at our country, 1.5 million schools. 1 million of them is government schools, 3.5 lakhs private schools. Even within the private schools, you've got the high-end chains. You've got tier 1 schools, you've got tier 3 schools, you've got standalone schools. Your schools which fee structures are 30,000 and 40,000. You've got schools with fee structure of 2 lakhs and 3 lakhs. You've got an IB, you've got an IGCSE and a CB. There's such a wide variety. 260 million students, nearly 10 million teachers. And now let's go one step beyond. There are 13 lakh Anganwadis around in this country. 2 lakh Anganwadi workers, 4,000 supervisors out there. To try and get this across to this diaspora, I think will require, it is going to be challenging, and therefore the real test is in how do you execute this. It's not impossible, but it has to be done. It cannot be done the way it is today. So while Ms. Karwal started with us beautifully by explaining how it will go down to the masses, since then we really don't know what has really happened. Is there some kind of a monitoring mechanism? Is there some kind of an update as to how this is going into, because if you ask the private schools, especially the ones in the metros, as Varghese said, the metro schools will say that this is already there in us. We're already doing it. So the real challenge is to take this to those, to the last mile. So that is one challenge. The second challenge, I think, lies in interpretation of the policy. You see, any policy with all the many points that are there, the interpretation, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of excitement about this whole teaching in vernacular language for the early child. And NEP is, in fact, this policy brings in the formative years between 3 to 8, 3 to 6 and 6 to 8. Now, this is a great intervention because especially you go into the rural belt, a child starts to learn what he or she picks up from within the home. And it's good to start with the vernacular. However, this has been misinterpreted. Even private school teachers are now asking, oh, does it mean that I can't teach English anymore? Does it mean that I have to only stick to Hindi? Now, what happens if a Bihari laborer's child is sitting inside an Anganwadi in Tamil Nadu because he's gone there? You know, now these questions will remain unanswered unless you bring in that clarity and start sharpening the interpretation of these policies. Second is the vocational education. I'm just giving an example. Vocational education starts from standard 6. But they also said, the NEP actually says that introduce the concept of vocation from standard 1. Talk about gardening, talk about pottery, talk about... Now, what does this mean? Now, is vocational education starting from standard 6 or do you introduce vocation from standard 1? If you have to take it to this last mile teachers and get them to understand what this is, I think it will require a different level of execution. And the third challenge simply lies in the cultural change. I mean, we are moving from a rote learning to a competency-based learning. We are moving to a space where the new generation is going to be so much more exposed to digital technology that today you don't need to search for material, it's there. I think the real test is how do you interpret it and how do you convince someone else, how do you articulate it. So communication becomes an important area. Critical thinking becomes an important area. Mental fitness becomes an important area. Physical fitness. All this means you need to somewhere adapt to digital platforms. Now, I have done teacher training during the COVID. One of the government schools, central government, wanted to get a training on online teaching because we've been doing online teaching on the private side. The teachers were not even sure how to download Chrome. So there is a challenge, and we need to be aware of these challenges. So some of these challenges probably are important. Jaspreet ma'am talked about teachers. The other big areas that, like I think in the previous panels we understood that teachers are the fulcrum around which everything has to work. And today people talk about teacher vacancies. But I remember and have had a conversation with a very, very senior ex-bureaucrat, Mr. Anil Swaroop, about this. And he mentions there are no teacher vacancies. It is teacher imbalance. There are some schools with 100 children who have got only 2 teachers. There are some schools with 10 children who have got 30 teachers. Now that imbalance can only be understood if there is a proper technological connect between the teacher. The ERPs have to be perfect. So these are all the challenges. Now to get this going into that last mile, I think is going to be pretty challenging.
I think, thank you, Vinesh. I think you have rightly mentioned the challenges in terms of implementing what is being written there in that policy, and that is actually very important, and how technology can enable right implementation of right things of the policy on ground. Now, I'll move again to Ma'am Rashmi Arun Shami from Madhya Pradesh. Ma'am, what are your thoughts on this National Education Policy 2020? How do you see give me a state's perspective, how do you see it?
So, I think the NEP 2020 is a very, it's a policy that will bring about very far-reaching changes if it is implemented properly. And since you're asking me the state's perspective, I think in Madhya Pradesh we are really excited about implementing the NEP. And some of the things that we are doing are that, number one is, if I just look at it age group wise, then it talks about early childhood education. So we are working on early childhood education. We've started training our Anganwadi workers on that. But apart from that, we are also doing starting pre-primary classes in some of our own schools, including the CM Rise schools, which I will talk about in a minute. We are running a very structured foundational literacy numeracy program in MP. And I'm very happy to say that we have devised a very good training mechanism for all our teachers. And God willing, we will see the results of that by the end of this year, because we have been able to impress upon our teachers the importance of foundational literacy numeracy and how that will lead to actually children doing very well later on, because they would have had their basics in place. We are doing a very structured career counseling program. We are doing school to work program, as Jaspreet mentioned, a vocational education program. We are trying to improve upon the points that you were making right now. And most of all, what we have tried to do to implement the NEP well is to start CM Rise schools. So this is an initiative of the state government where In phase 1, we are starting 370 schools. Over a period of 10 years, we are hoping that we would have established close to 10,000 schools. These schools are, I wouldn't say they are revolutionary for the government sector, because it's not something that has not been done before, but we are trying to do it in a far more structured manner. So these are going to be K to 12 schools. We have already started our schools this year. The buildings are going to be constructed soon. The infrastructure is going to be world class. The idea now is to transport children to school from the area nearby, because as Sir mentioned earlier, that earlier the challenge was to take schools to children. Now we have to improve learning. So we have to make sure that we have very high quality schools where children are being transported. And then in terms of quality, we are ensuring that all the things that are included in NEP, including extracurricular activities, including things like STEAM and STEM, all that is being implemented well. And these schools are going to function along the lines of the school complex idea of NEP. So they work as a center of resources, and the schools around them can come and take help of that. And I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we will see that there is a significant change in these schools, the culture change. And regarding teacher training, as Jaspreet mentioned, it's very, very important that we train our teachers well. And I think leveraging NEP and leveraging technology, during COVID, we started the CM Rise Teacher Professional Development Program, and we use the Diksha platform of the Government of India to take small courses to our teachers where they could, do it on their own time. And we did a pre-course and a post-course assessment of the teachers, and we realized that teachers were really excited about it, and they started actually using that. And I'm very, very happy to say that the National Achievement Survey results actually helped confirm our belief that if you train the teacher properly, it'll show an impact in the field. Because Madhya Pradesh, we weren't doing too well earlier, and last NAS 2017, we were 17th overall. This NAS, I'm very, very happy to say that our teachers worked so hard and our children worked so hard. So we ranked 5th overall, which was a tremendous sort of boost for us, because thank you, because it's a thing, in a state like MP, doing something like this, it's not easy to convince our teachers and to get them to all come on the same platform and work towards something. That has been a huge challenge, and I'm very, very grateful to the team for achieving something like this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think we congratulate you for doing so well in terms of educational reforms in the state and implementing NEP, definitely. And Ms. Jaspreet Talwar, you have already shared a lot of things about Punjab, how differently Punjab is, taking initiative in education. But I would like to take your view about the NEP 2020. What have you taken from that policy, and what are you implementing in your state? And what are your thoughts in general also?
Oh, excellent, thank you. So in fact, I'd just like to say that there are many elements of the NEP which I think the states were already executing, but it's come into a black and white form. So, now it is being recognized and moved forward. So there are, may I just say, because again it would seem a repetitive thing, but I think unless, like the point Mr. Vinesh Menon mentioned, that, unless and until your HR policies are in place, proper HR policies are in place, an unhappy task force is not going to give you good results. Now, let me just say that we had an e-Punjab portal. So all basic things which a teacher requires, or let's say, requires, gets done on the portal. So there is no requirements. It's a digital portal for the state. Any leave, any increment, any, promotional issue which is there, all those get covered in a portal. You don't waste your time on that. The government is also, therefore what happens is your focus changes towards the daily routine that you have to run, rather than you're running around to get your work done, right? Your own work done. So I think that portal is working pretty well. For the purpose of transfers, we have a portal and a very fair system of transfers as to how you can apply for that vacancy. You have a score, and based on that, your transfers will be done. So that gives a sense of satisfaction that I have not been dealt unfairly in the system. So, and with the number of teachers being, let's say, 100,000 plus, it's very difficult to otherwise do transfers, and there are, requests and, pushes. So that has also taken care to some extent. The point of the mismanagement, or let us say the skewed teacher-student ratio, to take care of that, we have the policy that you have a certain number of teachers available. It's a pool. So as and when the school strength changes, the posts are provided by the head office. So it's not that you have identified that this school will have 5 posts and not more. So it changes as per the school strength, and performance of the teachers in the API scores in their annual performance, including their transfers, depends also upon their results, depends upon the enrollment in the school. So there is a focus on the HR side of the management. The government is also, through the NEP, looking at how to free the teachers from those routine jobs which are not their domain. So for example, under the MDM scheme, we pay a higher amount to the cook over there, so that the teacher and their time is not wasted in the cooking side of it, because you're paying a higher amount, you are able to get somebody who can give a hot meal to the children. Similarly, they have also provided for estate managers. What we are going in for now, the present government is looking at a manager for every school estate, so that you're not wasting your time on managing the school requirements which are there. So that person would be hired and fired by the SMC. So the school management committee would look after that. You would also provide security and other things for the school. You would also provide what is called sweeping facilities. So you give the money to the SMC, let them decide. So I think the independence of the school management committees is something which has played a very good role in Punjab, and that has helped. Let's say we get any money, we are able to utilize it well, because the community then participates. If I'm getting, let's say, 50,000 rupees for a room, or 1 lakh rupees for a room, but I need 2 lakh rupees, they are able to leverage that from the community. So the community participation in Punjab in the schools has been very large because of the involvement of the parents and the units there. So a lot of the NEP requirements which were there, for example, we introduced this, like I said, the morning activity which we've started, so that these things are also included. So there's a lot of takeaway. I think it's a visionary document, and if we can achieve that vision, I think there's a big future for all of us and for our children. That's all I can say.
That's right. I think you have rightly mentioned that HR management could be better in states, because I have seen since my childhood that government school teachers have been involved in so many things apart from teaching as well. I think we should start taking the teachers more seriously now, not only in terms of salary, but also in terms of work allocation given to them, so that we can use their capacities in the maximum way. And also, as you said about training the teachers, it is very important, and technology has a great role to play in that. I'll come back to you, Mr. Varghese. There have been some very important point raised by Mr. Vinesh also about implementing NEP on ground. And some of them are answered also by the principal secretaries. I would like to request you to, as you also said that I'll go more deep into NEP, and also if you can answer some of these questions arise about NEP and its challenges being implemented. Over to you, Mr. Varghese.
Thank you very much. I will see that if NEP is to be implemented, I think there are 3 issues which are cardinal for the school education system. One is about the new pattern that is being introduced. What does it mean in terms of reorganization of the infrastructure and facilities for the schools? The second issue relates to school complexes, how that will be created, and that is an important dimension. Third one, the special education zones, which the new education policy is talking about. Let me take, if you permit me, let me take 2 minutes each on any of these, or 1 minute each.
We have maybe 2-3 minutes if you compile everything, because we are running short.
I'll stick to the time that you allocate to me. So let me say that when we got independence in 1947, for the first 21 years, we did not have an education policy. Nobody knew what is the structure of education in this country. One of the biggest contributions of 1968 policy was that we said that there should be not a uniform, comparable structure. So we introduced what is called as the 10+2+3 system. That's a great contribution. 1986 policy reinforced that. After 34 years, a new policy is coming which says that there should be a need for change in that structure, a new structure is put. Now, what is the difficulty? In the earlier structure, if you look into primary education or upper primary education, which is a compulsory levels of education, all this major share of this education was either in the government sector or in the aided sector. But when you add early childhood education, the picture dramatically changes because it is done by the private, in the private agencies, and that too those students who are enrolled or children who are enrolled in these schools are mostly from the middle and upper middle class families, not from the everybody. So it is a lot of compulsions, not only in terms of financial resources, but also the social acceptance of this idea to send the children at the age of 3 to this, there is a lot of that. It needs a mini social revolution, and especially in the remote rural areas. This is one challenge. The second challenge what I am talking about is that that is about the school complexes. This at one level, this is a failed idea. In the 1950s and 60s, India had school complexes, and Maharashtra is one of the best examples of having successful school complexes, at least perceived it to be successful in school complexes. But today we are talking about a different system. But the difficulty is that we try to bring out some guidelines, and I have visited some of the places. And what is the difficulty? The difficulty is that if you have 7 or 8 or 10 schools and form a school complex, then the question is that which will be the lead school? Now the difficulty is complicated, the challenges are complicated also because of the reason that some of the schools are aided, some of the schools are unaided, and some of the schools are government. They belong to different management, and it is almost next to impossibility to share the resources when compared between these. And if you have a good private school, positively, English medium school, I don't think that they will be happy to share the resources with or the students or the teachers with other schools. Similar is the case with the government schools for a different reason. So I think that is a second challenge. I am just skipping faster. The third one is that the new education policy talks about special education zones. If you see that previously from 1950s onwards, what we used to have is that the targeting of resources was educationally backward states. And we said that there are 9 educationally backward states. People used to jokingly say that 9 gems of Indian education, the educationally backward states, that was identified, and all the resources used to be there. So we in our NEPA in 1989-90 said that no, this is not a right way of addressing the issues of backwardness, especially in education. So we went for the districts. We raised a slogan by saying that there are educationally backward districts, even in an educationally advanced states, and vice versa. So therefore, we should move from the state allocations and state priority to the district allocation. Those who are familiar with the DPEP, and since Madam is from Madhya Pradesh, there are 19 districts in Madhya Pradesh, the largest number of districts covered in the first round. 19 districts. I used to come almost every month for the discussions and negotiations at that point of time. What you find is that the educationally backward districts. Now what you are saying is that we should go back to the backward areas and localities that you should consider. And of course, we have renamed some of the educationally backward districts into aspirational districts, but it does not change the status of the districts, it makes no difference. So we have to get into this and then identify the backward blocks within the educational setup, within the districts, and try to see that. So in other words, what you are saying is that if I use a technical term, how do we target our resources? I am not talking about the financial resources alone. How do we target our resources to reach the ultimate, There is something called progressive universalism. Progressive universalism is exactly, this has come from the International World Gordon report, or the Education Commission report. But if you look into the details of it, it is exactly like what Mahatma Gandhi said in 1940s as the Antyodaya. So where should we start this action? So that action should be, that is the meaning of progressive universalism. So therefore, if we want to get into these type of efforts, we should put our efforts in those areas. I don't think that public financing can't resolve the problems of education in this country, but there is immense scope for targeting of the public resources in a better way so that they are more effectively used and the education system becomes more productive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Varghese. I think you are rightly mentioned that there should be a targeted intervention in terms of implementing any policy, and thank you for giving us, a background of decades ago and how it has been progressed till today. Thank you so much, Mr. Varghese. Finally, Mr. Vinesh Mohan, I would like to ask you, being an industry stakeholder, how do you see the importance of public-private partnership in education? I have also personally seen a lot of PPP failures and also successes. But do you think there have been enough PPP in education ecosystem, or do we need more? Or what is the guarantee of the success of PPP models in education? Because it has its own challenges attached. Over to you.
Thank you, Kartik. I don't want to call it PPP or otherwise. I think the nexus or the association between the public domain and the private domain must increase. It could be through public-private partnerships, it could be through various other mechanisms. And therefore, my answer would be yes. And not because I'm from the private space, but because I'm seeing a lot of, I can see India changing. And my genuine belief is that the government is a platform which owns infrastructure. The government is a platform that can make policies. The government is a platform that should govern. And I think leave the operating and the execution to private players, especially because we are dealing with such a wide range and a diverse ecosystem like India. And at the same time, let me tell you, it's not as if this has not happened. I mean, way back in, we talk about online education and ICT, but the fact is in India, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're definitely much more learned than me in this area. But I think year 2000 is when this big change happened where they introduced from blackboards to digital boards. So classrooms wanted to change their blackboards and introduce digital boards. Smart classes came in. And ever since 2000, I think more than 12,000 schools, government schools, I'm referring purely to the government schools, private schools I'm keeping away from this discussion. 12,000 government schools across 500 districts have adopted smart classes. Now, my concern, and we've been doing a lot of surveys, is that while the smart classes got in, and smart classes is designed to change the way teaching was done, bring more excitement into the classroom, make it experiential, make the children happy about this pictorial way of teaching. But look at it today. Those machines are obsolete. They're not being used. Teachers use them for a brief period because they got trained in that moment. And after that, the sustainability just got compromised. And therefore, the concern is not about number of PPPs or number of associations. I think it is a contextual relevance of what should be done in PPPs. That is what is more important. So we keep talking about teacher training. Now, there are a lot of tools out there to provide teacher training. But I think the trick here is we are moving into an era where we need continuous professional development. So a teacher, and I believe in the government ecosystem, teachers are brought in twice in a year, and there are trainings that happen for X number of days. But once they go back, how do you continuously connect with that relevant training and keep upgrading yourself? And that is where the previous panel talked about having platforms which can make it more interesting for the teachers. The third example is even after the smart class incident, even today, there are states where I've seen tenders being floated for just delivery of 6 lakh smartphones or 10 lakh smartphones, which is getting done. But what is the outcome and the relevance? Is there a baseline? Is there an end line? Are the students actually benefiting from this? Is the content getting upgraded from time to time? I don't know. I'm sure there must be some way it must be getting done. Some states could be doing it. But by and large, I think there is a challenge. A few of the projects that we have done, and I'm not going to mention the states, let me give you an example of what we did. And this is where I bring in that small differentiation as to how we need to. So for example, there was one particular municipal corporation where the schools, we replaced the textbooks with tablets. And this was only for the 10th standard to improve their learning towards the last mile of their very important milestone. And, the tender called for educational institutions to be part of the bidding process and not the digital device supplier. So till now, the digital device supplier would be able to give the supplies, but they are not really I mean, I'm not going to blame them, but they won't be too keen to complete the process of training and sustaining and doing a baseline and an end line. Whereas an education institution who uses technology can probably provide that. So maybe the manner in which you tweak some of these inputs for creating public-private partnerships could be a shade better. Second, we know about Anganwadis, we know about schools, we know about state schools. But how many of us realized that the labor department, a cess of 1% that is getting collected for every construction, which can actually be used by the Board of Construction, Labor Board, for the benefit of the construction workers' families, also includes early child education for the children of construction workers. So there is a state which has actually leveraged this and realized after a survey that all the children of these construction workers, it's too far for them to go to Anganwadis, and therefore within a 1 kilometer radius of the construction site, we need to create creches. They brought in a tender, private parties took part, and now nearly about 300 creches are being run. Nearly 7,000 little children are getting excellent early child education and early child, early child care. So I think the trick is really to tweak the manner in which this is being done. And the government has got some great ideas. There's Swarna Prabha, which is supposed to be a digital channel. There are 32 digital channels in DTH today, which provide education to children. But it's one way. It provides education. You can't really assess whether the child has understood what is being taught. So while the content keeps changing, there is no two-way mechanism. Now IIT is trying to develop something which can make this two-way. Now who brings it back into the system, talks to the government, brings in this innovation, makes that change? That is what I'm attempting to. I think so when I talk about public-private partnership, I'm only talking about attempting to tweak the model which is happening today and bring in more relevance to the space. And of course, get the government to own infrastructure, govern, make policies. And of course, as Mr. Varghese said, change the budgeting process a bit. Because when you do these things, you also need to get your bandwidth cleared. You also need to make devices affordable. So your entire budget process has to undergo a change. Your IT budget needs to be moved into education. So many little things to be done, which the government can do. And allow the private operators to actually take it to the ground and execute it. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right, and rightly mentioned, thank you, Mr. Vinesh, rightly mentioned that the PPP will also work if it is rightly, the way it should be there. The difference between implementing PPP and the difference between how to partner with industry also makes a difference, because we have seen some states who have given some number of schools to a private company to run, and they were not run that way, the expected way, and it was a failure. But we have also seen schemes like private companies, maybe Akshay Patra was one of those schemes, which was at times we have seen the success in various states. So
yeah, so I just want to add that, and that is where the governance comes in. The government holds the power to ensure that the outcome gets done. So the government has it in them to terminate that relationship. The government has it in them to pull back the budgets. There are so many things that the government can do. And Akshay Patra is a great example of providing nutrition to pull a child into the classroom. But to take it from there to education and learning and outcomes is where I think there is probably a gap.
I have a lot to ask, I think, even to those two ladies about the PPP. So if you just give 1 minute each of you on this and take it as your closing remarks, then I request, because it's an interesting point, because I have witnessed a speech by an IAS officer who said that PPP is very important, but government must also think. He was a government officer, but he said the government must also think that if there's a private entity, they have to also run a business. So PPP has to take care that also. So Mr. Varghese, I'll request for your closing remarks, and I'll request for a minute each from all the panelists so that we can wrap it up. And I think we have taken your remarks as a closing remarks from you. So
I can give another small line later.
So a minute from each of you. We'll start with Mr. Varghese. Your closing remarks, please.
Thank you very much. I feel that how many private sector institutions are established in the remote rural areas and the tribal areas. So when we talk about PPP, so I am not worried about this middle class and upper middle class. I will send my daughter to any school, whether there is a government school or private school. My concern as a national planner is not that. I am concerned more about those deprived groups. That is one point. So therefore, I don't think that PPP, I'm not against PPP. It's a solution to the major problems that I highlighted as the issue. Second, CSR is one of the good elements that can be used by this. If you say 1,000 school project, which is funded by the Tata CSR, I have visited the tribal areas in Orissa, etc., 2 years ago. Even as the Vice Chancellor, I visited this. You find that they're doing a marvelous job. They are trying to see that how to create learning environment in the government schools. I think that is the place where we had to find solutions, private intervention, not as a private entity separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Your closing remarks, please. Ma'am, Rashmi ma'am. Okay, any one of you.
So, I think there are two things. Number one, it doesn't matter whether the child is studying in a government school or a private school. There is no problem with the child. They're all equally intelligent. In fact, many times I find that the children who are studying in government schools are way more hardworking, way more enthusiastic, and they really have a fire in the belly to, achieve something. All we need to do is give them the right kind of support. So that's the good news, that there is no problem. Regarding public-private partnership, I think as Sir mentioned, it's very important to understand that the private sector is not always willing to step into the most difficult areas. So, and in MP, we haven't done much work, frankly, on the public-private partnership. But what is happening is that we have a lot of very bright people from the corporate sector coming and helping us with policy designing and policy implementation. And I think that's a very welcome step. For example, we have BCG working with us. In a lot of other states, you have a lot of other corporate people who are now supporting state governments on policy making as well as policy implementation. And the advantage is that they are bringing in teams which are, they have very good managerial ability, analytical ability. Their technical strength is that they are able to look at large data sets and analyze them quickly and then come back to us. And that helps us in data-based decision making as well as, evidence-based decision making. So I think that, public-private partnership is important up to a point, but what is happening in this sector, where the private sector is coming and helping us, is way more exciting. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, your remarks, please.
Well, Punjab did try. I think we are, in these matters, quite open to it. And I think Punjab tried with what was called the Adarsh school. So we set up the infrastructure and we brought in private parties to run it. The experience over the last, 10 years now has been good and bad. So good where you got a good, partner to come in. They are running the schools very well and they continue to run it. So it's a matter of pride, and the children are studying free of cost in those schools, or the government is supporting it for that purpose. Yet there were some, people who were dealing badly. So like he said, you need to cancel the contracts and move on. So I think there is a chance where for bringing in excellence in certain areas where the private sector has the, wherewithal to handle it better than government. We may be good at systems and, but technology and others are areas where private sector can come in. The other sectors, for example, vocational training, it's all happening through the private sector only. You tell me today we have what is called the vocational training partners. So it's the vocational training partners who are giving the vocational training. So it's a public-private partnership in the true sense, in that sense. The other thing is about these edtech platforms, since many of them attended today. I'd only like to say procurement in government is an issue. So therefore, in many cases, the procedures are so cumbersome that sometimes you say, please come free of cost, we are happy to work with you. But don't come to us to procure you or you or you, because I cannot pick you like in a private sector or in a private school. I can decide I want so-and-so as my partner. In government, I cannot. I'm dealing with public money. So the systems are such, so financial rules are such that I cannot do it. So I think it's a difficult challenge for us also, but I think there's a lot of involvement of the private sector now, and like Rashmi mentioned, through the NGO initiative, there are lots of NGOs which are working with the governments, free of cost. From their own side, they get their partner funding and they are working with us. So are some, like she said, private sector professionals who have come in to support the government in the implementation of schemes. So I think the way forward is working as a team rather than as government and private. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. And Vinesh, finally you got to know about opportunities and the challenges and related to PPP from none other than the government decision makers here on the dais. So quickly, your closing remarks, Vinesh.
No, I think I've never doubted that the government is looking to make the whole process better. I think I'll speak for everyone when I say this, that despite the approaches and despite the means, the objective is to really drive value education in India, and it has to be done at a super speed now, because I think somewhere it's slightly near an ICU and we have to get it out because of the pure size of, and the demographic advantage that we have as a country, 26 crore children. I think the other reason is, again, I'd speak for everybody. If you really look at, this whole United Nations development programs, key metric is the HDI, or the Human Development Index, which is really a geometric mean of income index, health index, and education index. So I think somewhere, there is a research which says that a million change in enrollments can actually move the HDI a few percentage points. And India, unfortunately, is ranked at 132 out of 191 countries in HDI. I mean, our neighbor like China is at 79. Even Bangladesh is at 129. Norway is at 1. But I think if you have to really focus, that's a benchmark. I'm sure there are many ways of handling this, but if you have to simply move this piece forward, education is very critical. I think there's a lot of emphasis that has come today in areas like Swachh Bharat, infrastructure development, women empowerment, all very, very important programs. But somewhere if we go back 30 years, and probably if investments were done in education, as Mr. Varghese had mentioned about a little more focus in that area, perhaps we don't need a Swachh Bharat, because people will be so educated that they won't make the place dirty. Maybe women empowerment would have come in much earlier. So I think somewhere today going forward, if an impetus can be put behind education with as much seriousness as it is being put behind IT and infra and other areas, I think it'll make a big difference.
Thank you so much, Vinesh. And I think it has been a wonderful interaction. And one of our speakers has a flight to catch. So we are closing it here. Can we do a memento giving ceremony just for a minute? So I request the anchor to for mementos. And here we'll be closing the discussion.